Good morning, everyone. We're happy to have you join us for this webinar brought to you by Reagan Communications in partnership with Add-in 365, titled Reconnect Your Employees by Delivering a Brand-Aligned Digital Hub. My name is Amanda Jorgensen, Strategic Program Manager at Reagan Communications, and I'll be your host today. On behalf of Reagan Communications, I'm excited to welcome you to this fantastic webinar, which will bring you ways to reconnect your dispersed staff. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll learn about how to use a brand-aligned, employee-focused, and visually appealing intranet to aid retention and support growth. We'll also talk about ways you can use things such as online communities to strengthen your internal communication strategies and deliver a feel-good connection with your employees, and so much more. Now, all of you in the audience will be able to ask our Microsoft MVP presenter questions through the Q&A box found at the bottom of your screen. Please type your questions as they come to you, as we'll try to take as many questions as we can following the presentation. During this event, you're in listen-only mode. That means that your line is muted, so you cannot hear the other participants or any background noise. You may be listening to the event today on your computer speakers or on your phone line. Depending on the speed of your internet connection, you may experience breaks in your audio broadcast over the computer. If you do experience any audio trouble on the computer, we recommend dialing in on the phone line for the best and most reliable audio connection. Now, again, I encourage you to submit your questions as they come to you so we can try to get as many answered following the presentation. To do so, please send them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Also, if you want to hide or move subtitles, please go to either the three dots or the CC box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen and either hide or move subtitles as you prefer them. If you have any technical questions, please enter those into the chat box and we'll do our best to help you with those. So once again, please use the Q&A box for presenter questions and the chat box for technical questions. All right, so everybody knows where and how to post your questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Suzy Dean, the CEO and co-founder of Add-in 365. Following Suzy's presentation, she'll be answering your questions, and after the Q&A session, I'll provide direction as to how you'll be able to access the materials post-event. But for now, I'm going to hand things over to you, Suzy.
And let's get into our subject matter for today on how to reconnect your employees by delivering a brand-aligned digital hub. What we'll do today by way of an agenda is I'll give a quick 5-minute introduction to Add-in 365, and then we'll talk about how to achieve brand alignment. I think it's worth pausing to look at why that's important, and then we can turn to how that can be done. We're going to have a quick look at Microsoft 365's Viva Connections applications, specifically Viva Connections. One reason is that that's actually part of the E3 and E5 package, which lots of organizations already have. But secondly, because it really helps to give a personalized experience to digital hubs on Office 365, and it allows that branding to come through into the Teams interface. So it's worth knowing a bit about what that is. We're then going to close out by spending 15 minutes or so showcasing some client work for St James Place, and they're 20,000 people big. They're a wealth management company here in the UK. Wincanton, they're a supply chain organisation, again 20,000 people big. Signant Health, who do a lot of the clinical trials for vaccinations, and they're 2,000 people big, but spread all over the world. As was said in the introduction, please do ask questions throughout, and we'll take those as we go through. So very quickly, a little bit about Add-in 365. We are a Microsoft managed charter partner. You've probably heard of gold partners, silver partners, but this is an accreditation given to a handful of people globally, and we hold that for business applications and content services. Microsoft have an MVP program. The MVP program is for about 200 people globally of more than 1 million practitioners that they consider to be global experts in their technology. And we have 3 full-time MVPs here at Add-in 365, of which I am one. And we work very closely with the various product groups within Microsoft to help shape and align some of the thinking on what's being produced. And we like to mention that at the beginning because when we work with organisations, we help them to stay aligned to where Microsoft is going, which is quite important in an evergreen world. We speak very regularly at Microsoft's Ignite, Inspire, SharePoint conferences, and we often do that in partnership with our customers, showcasing some of the work that we've done with them. Everything I'm going to show you through the next 50 minutes or so has been delivered to organisations in all kinds of different sectors. So when we're thinking about connecting with employees, when we're thinking about brand alignment, the principles that we go through, we think are applicable to most industries and sizes of organisation. So let's start by considering why brand alignment is important. Firstly, I think from a performance perspective, we've seen over the last 21 months or so, individuals being somewhat estranged from their physical workplaces, and that in turn has been seen to impact people's motivation and ability to get their jobs done. Brand buy-in improves performance and employee attitudes about the organisations that they're working for. It brings that touch point to them and is making up for, is compensating for that lack of physicality that we enjoy when we're able to come together. Brand alignment also helps employees to feel part of the long-term strategy that an organisation has, which in turn aids retention. I think most people have heard the Microsoft Work Index trend from earlier this year, and that statistic that nearly half the workforce are looking to move jobs. I think having a brand-aligned platform experience is both helpful to retain people, but flipping that around, it's also good to attract talent when you have that brand alignment and that nice, slick digital experience available to employees as well. It's becoming more and more important with hybrid working and of course with many organisations still predominantly working from home. That of course is something that in large organisations has been commonplace for many years. Although of course not ubiquitous throughout the marketplace. Brand alignment can also help emotional connectedness. I think the best analogy for this is imagining that if you turned up to a physical office for your first day at work and the office is completely dilapidated and there's broken chairs and branding from 10 years ago and there's chips on the walls, having somebody within the organisation interfacing with your organisation through a digital medium where there's broken links in the digital hubs that you've got. There's very, very old branding. It's out of date content and imagery that doesn't reflect your organisation. It doesn't make people feel particularly good or connected to your organisation and its culture. So having something that's beautifully branded, that works really well, that's highly personalised, gives people a sense of appreciation. And looking at that Forbes stat that 62% of remote employees feel underappreciated, it's definitely something to try and resolve. Lastly, brand alignment can really help employee behaviour to align to the corporate values and messaging that you want to put out there. When brand is reflected internally, it has the same impact as when it's reflected externally, in that it helps individuals to understand the brand itself, and ultimately that's why your customers invest in you. So reinforcing the way of working that you want to promote within your organisation. So let's look at how brand alignment can be achieved, and I am going to be talking to and demonstrating through Office 365 as that is what Add-in 365 are specialists in, though I think the core principles could probably be taken into any technology platform that you happen to work with. Brand alignment is twofold, I think. The first part is, of course, having your own brand guidelines, tone of voice, imagery that reflects who you are, and ensuring that people that speak on behalf of your organisation are following those guidelines. But the second part to brand alignment is actually aligning to digital trends that exist well beyond your organisation and are actually out there already on the web, whether that's through social platforms or very nice shopping sites that you might frequent. And so some of the brand alignment trends for this year, for example, have been around anti-gravity. So that's where you have flying or floating elements within a page or interface. Open composition, where there's movement on a page to draw the eye into specific content. Maxi typography, maxi imagery, although maxi typography has been on trend for some time. So I think to help connect employees to your brand, we need brand alignment. That's part what you bring from brand guidelines, and that's part looking at what's already in the marketplace that's considered appealing. And that is important, because if we think about the digital hubs, intranets, portals that we have within our own organisations, when we start to think, oh, that feels a bit dated, it's normally because the market's moved on in terms of what's nice. And so it is important to stay on top of that. So I'm going to pull over a very quick demonstration screen to just show you how some of these trends manifest. So fluid and liquid effect is one of the trends that we see a lot of this year. And so what we do at Add-in 365 is we take as a starting point that capabilities within SharePoint, Yammer, Teams are really brilliant for internal communications, and organisations can and should make use of those capabilities. For example, news is there, it can be audience targeted, it's mobile ready. There's already a video capability in Stream, there's already community capability in Yammer. What's missing from SharePoint Modern tends to be the elements that can allow for that brand alignment and for those trends to come into the experience you're trying to deliver to employees. So we've got a web part here called Stargaze, which makes use of that fluid and liquid movement that just adds some nice fluidity really to the page and prevents it being too static. We've brought animation into our experience as well, which aligns to that anti-gravity trend where you have these floating elements. If I go all the way down here, we've also brought in things like background images, which sit behind common tools and capabilities, allowing for photography or imagery to that aligns to our brand guidelines to be introduced to the page. We talked about maxi typography and maxi imagery being on trend, and so we have alternative headers available that align to that. And these are living alongside those out-of-the-box capabilities that you can see here for things like news. And we've also got community capabilities coming through here, and it is worth saying that a really good experience pulls together context for the employee. So bearing in mind lots of people are working at home either part or full time, it's not enough to just throw a community out there and hope that people will take part. That there needs to be context around there needs to be context around the experience that you're delivering. So having some news, our work in the community, and then the community itself is very helpful. If you keep an eye on this sentence here, as I land on the page, we have our reveal component, again, drawing the eye into that particular piece of text as we're browsing. And then we've got a combination of other things here, video headers, maps, roadmaps for new employee onboarding. Anyway, I won't sort of go into absolutely everything that's available, but those capabilities allow us to bring together new market trends and also our brand guidelines. And you can see here with our roadmap component, we're able to use a combination of colour through the roadmap itself, as well as background image behind to do that. So delivering really rich user interfaces. Tone of voice is also part of how we tell our brand story and communicate to our organisation about who we are and what we do. And we have a bot capability here that the name, of course, is fully adjustable. But if I ask the question, the way my bot comes back and answers my question is also reflective of the tone of voice that we give these capabilities. So if you do have digital assistants within the organisation, see that as part of the brand remit. And as informing the way that we are engaging our employees. And something else we have here, which I recommend everybody puts in, is the ability to give feedback. So actually, if I'm not too happy with this, if I'm replying that I needed a link to someone that I could speak to, and I'm communicating that I'm not happy, we've developed something that will actually take that feedback into a list for those that own that content to consider and to update the content against. So great to be tone of voice aligned, but obviously listening to people's feedback and actioning that is really, really important as well. Do we have any questions at this point that I can take?
We do have a couple of questions that have come in so far. One that had come in from Heather is, from a content perspective, are there trends or guidelines around the amount of content on a page, the number of subpages in a hub, etc.?
It's funny that that should be a question, because we've seen lots of organisations struggle with this. It's almost that moment where you go into the supermarket and you know there's every ingredient imaginable and you've got an ingredients list, so that's good. You put everything in your trolley, you get it home and you realise you haven't got the recipe. And I think lots of organisations feel that now, which is they've got lots of great stuff with SharePoint Modern. They've potentially bought something like our own Creative and Page Kit, and then they go, oh, how do we configure this? How do we set these sites and pages out? And Add-in 365 actually have some readily available off-the-shelf pre-canned templates for departments, communities, products, processes, new employee onboarding, which is we use with organisations as a starter for 10. So we take that, then we workshop it to make it specific to organisations. So to whoever asked that question, I feel your pain. It is difficult to just go from a blank sheet of paper to determining that. And our answer to it has been to produce some templates that we then workshop to being specific to your organisation, and do get in touch afterwards if you would like to see those. Okay. Do we have any other questions?
We do have a couple other questions that came in, but we'll ask one and then I'll let you get back to it and make sure that we can get to the others. But what advice would you have for an organization looking to drive staff engagement onto an internal hub that has been underutilized or stale in the past? The person who's asking the question said that they're invested in reinvigorating the portal, but they need ideas of how to drive people there and make it a regularly utilized resource, which goes beyond design elements and speaks again more to content, probably.
Yeah, I think there's two parts. I think the first is to really question what's the point of that content, whether it's on your plan of things to get from the business or it already exists. What's the point of it? What benefit is it serving? We find that lots of organisations have content that's descriptive and not very useful to the individual. So I would certainly audit my content against that. But I would also feel inclined to look at the navigations and the paths through your portal to see if they're actually task-based. What tends to happen is let's just take the example of somebody that's new to the organisation. somewhere under IT or in the IT part of the site, there'll be something about going and collecting your laptop and how to log in. Somewhere in facilities, there'll be something about a door pass. Somewhere in HR, there'll be something about your first day do's and don'ts. And then perhaps somewhere under finance, there'll be something about payroll. When actually a new employee needs to be spoken to as a new employee with needs and tasks specific to the new employee. So our new employee onboarding template, for example, has all of those things hubbed into one place. And it's not to say that the content isn't still produced or owned by those distinct business areas, but rather than reflecting the org chart back to the organisation, we're starting to think what's going to be useful to people that work here, either by tenure or by role or by business function activity, what they do day to day. It can be difficult to do that when you're in the organisation yourself, but that is definitely the way that certainly we approach it, and we would recommend you do too.
Perfect. Fantastic. And one other question I just want to toss out there before you finish your present or get back into your presentation was asked is, how do you do this with a bilingual or multilingual intranet?
Well, within SharePoint, there is no automatic translation capability. So you tend to have a site with pages that are then translated. They are, even though you can template and copy those, the content within it needs to be written by somebody that speaks that language and that will own that going forward. So you may well end up with a shadow or bilingual content production team. I think the benefit is that if there are differences in what those communities require from a content point of view, going back to my previous point about making sure that content is task-based and isn't just reflecting the org chart back, that's actually fine, because you would need to be producing different content for those people anyway, but it does require a duplication of effort where you want to publish exactly the same information to in those two languages.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We do have other questions, but we'll definitely get back to those other questions when we get to the Q&A portion, because I don't want you to get too far astray, Suzy.
No problem. Okay, so there is just one other demo that I wanted to show. So brand alignment and discussions about who we are as an organisation are now really closely linked to initiatives in the world that we align to and values that we have. So we've got this concept of a takeover within the Adin 365 product set, where we can use templates to temporarily take over the look and feel of our intranets, portals, sites. And in my example here, we've got a Pride takeover. So this is a UI that might cascade through our sites for a period of time, and then we can revert back to normal. You might have one for Diwali or Christmas, Pride, or Black History Month. Really, the causes that you take on are dependent on your organisation. We know lots of organisations try to do this, but it's actually quite a lot of work to do that. And so we've got these templated takeovers that can help to facilitate that, and connect with our employees on what it is we care about, and deliver that good-looking brand alignment at the same time. So you can see here, my homepage has this Pride takeover, and we've got other assets through the site that this has cascaded down to. The idea of the page takeover, the templates I talked about are all available through something called Site Builder that we make available. And in a nutshell, it allows you to produce templates for use within your organisation. And that is important, because you don't want 20 department sites looking like 20 completely different sites. It's not a good user experience for employees, knowing that processes are always in the same place in every department site is important, as it is knowing where the community successes is when we talk about poor findability, and we know that in all of the market research that Gartner and Forrester and so on do, poor findability of content ranks the #1 bugbear. One of the best ways to resolve that is by having a very consistent architecture. So whether you produce these sorts of templates yourselves, or whether you invest in some that are off the shelf, having those available gives a great user experience, and also makes life much easier if you're the owner of your intranet or hub. And I'll just click through this very quickly, but effectively it allows you organisationally to make those available, which apart from giving you that consistency, saves so much time and energy when you do have lots of departments or lots of communities that need configuring. And our site builder takes that all the way down to every page within that site. And I think this one is more than 100 pages big. So the kit I've shown you today, it can all be configured and branded to suit your and reflect your organisation's identity. Wavemaker is one of our clients, and they're a WPP media company. And in 2017, we delivered this Wavemaker experience here on the far left. Being a branding agency, they wanted to update that a year later, and we moved to this middle concept. And then a year beyond that, they wanted to change again and went for something really quite funky. So it is a tool set that can be used to align to your brand, whatever that is. And I don't think you'd even think these are the 3 same technologies, let alone using the same kit. Okay, I'll move on to talking a little bit about Microsoft's new Viva Connections capability, but I will pause to ask if there are any questions as we're at the halfway point.
A couple other questions that had come in is, how do you ensure brand cohesion across the whole intranet site when you have multiple contributors, departments responsible for posting content?
It's interesting. We worked with an organisation recently, and there was a slight issue because one part of the organisation said, well, we have, name of organisation, and then the department, we have our own special brand guidelines. And actually there needed to be a bit of an airing on that, because of course an organisation is exactly that. It is a network of individuals working towards the same end goal. So to have multiple brands within that doesn't make a great deal of sense unless you're an organisation that has multiple operating companies within it. And then there needs to be a decision up front about, are we asking our employees to align to their operating company or to the umbrella company? So I think whichever road organisation you go down, there has to be a conversation up front about it. It can't be a thing where you can sort of sleepwalking into most of the site looking like this, and then there's a bright purple one over there and one that uses different fonts and different imagery, because it doesn't help to build that sense of connectedness that you want with your employees. It feels fragmented. It feels like you're in a bazaar rather than in a in something that's comprehensive and well thought through. I think from a tone of voice and a content point of view, I so strongly advise just having some and really fighting for some resource centrally that can support the business with their content writing, because sometimes it's about tone. So for example, we work with one organisation who referred to their employees as colleagues, and so that everybody needed to do that. And of course, some people were saying employees, some people were calling it workforce. So having some guidelines, having some people centrally to help enforce and support the business in following those is important. But actually, by far the biggest challenge we see on the content side is people that just can't write the content. They're not sure how to structure it. And so we produce and we make available to all of our clients a content template. So that, the structure of an article should begin with, who is this for? What does it relate to? In what time frame? because we were finding that people were writing paragraphs. It's like, who's this for? What's this about? You know, so I think having the upfront conversation on look and feel is important. But then having that support internally to help people learn those brand guidelines, and then helping people to learn how to structure articles is really important. And it's not complicated. I mean, just having a template of this is how we recommend you structure a page of content is normally sufficient. But you know, most people aren't hired to be copywriters, so that can help perhaps with some of those questions on quality. So I wanted to spend a bit of time looking at the new Microsoft Viva Connections capability. And this is a service that Microsoft have positioned to talking to matters of culture and communications. So the Viva Connections capability is something that is desktop enabled, and in the desktop, if we were to be really, really crude, what it means is that within the Microsoft Teams interface, you'll have an icon in your left-hand rail that you can click on and your intranet will appear visible. And that's great because people are spending lots of time in Microsoft Teams. Being able to get into your intranet from there is a no-brainer. But just after summer, Microsoft also released this, which is the Viva Connections Viva Connections mobile app, and it consists of three things: a dashboard, a feed, and resources, and it's entirely personal to you as the individual. So when we're thinking about brand alignment and who we are as an organization, it speaks volumes, and it's incredibly powerful to be investing in technology that's completely tailored to the individual. So if we just take the dashboard here for a moment, this dashboard capability is giving me information I need. And if I'm brought in as a client services manager, it might be that I have some news here that's about my client specifically already there on my dashboard as priority information that I should be consuming. As I click through into that article, I get that portal. We've got location information here. About where I need to go to work with my client. And I've also got some feedback that the client has given about their experience of working with our team. So it's possible to be very, very tailored and to give snippets of information to individuals that's really going to turn the dial on their working day. Viva Connections can also help us to deliver a completely personalised experience from the communications standpoint as well. So here we are again on my dashboard, and actually I'm quite new in role, and the organisation has helpfully given me my week 3 plan of what I should be doing as a new employee. Furthermore, as I click on resources here, I get my intranet navigation, and within the Viva capability, this is fully personalized and responding all the time to what it is that I'm clicking on and consuming. So my view of this navigation is going to be different to my colleagues, because the content I read most frequently is going to be promoted above what's there. Nonetheless, I can browse my intranet navigation from here. And click through into stories that are relevant to me. We can also help to connect people and to make that conversation easier. Going back to that statistic about half of the workforce looking to move role, one of the things that doesn't really happen anymore is that sort of first day with people going around with a box of donuts saying hello to everybody. So Viva Connections can be used to set up buddy systems. And this might be for interns, junior people. It might just be because you've moved into a new team or you're working with a new client. And so you can see here, Wes has been set up as my onboarding buddy. And at the click of the button, I can dive straight into conversation with him, or even straight into a call with him to get what I need from him. So really, really rich capability to help connect people to one another. Viva Connections is also great for segmenting content and delivering really targeted messaging. I think the larger organisation you are, the more important this is. If we have an operational update, we don't want it going to everybody in head office as well. And Viva Connections delivers this in a couple of ways. Firstly, through tailored news updates, which can be pulled together and shared with specific groups of people. But secondly, through this fully personalised news feed that's bringing together posts from SharePoint, conversations from Yammer communities that I'm in as well. It's also possible to set this up to consume third-party news sources as well, making this a one-stop shop for information that's relevant to me. And this could not have come at a better time, because we've worked with lots of comms teams that have been saying to us, we might publish that news article in SharePoint, but if everybody's in Teams, how can we make sure it gets to them? And if somebody's posting in the community in Yammer, how do we know that that's got to people either? And the answer was almost, oh, they need to check Yammer and Teams and SharePoint, which is obviously not great. So having that Viva Connections feed that brings all my content together in one place is very, very useful from a comms point of view, because you can be rest assured that your content's going to reach the intended audience, and it simplifies the experience for the employee as well. Does anybody have any questions?
So one other question that had come in, so you were talking about the Yammer posts. Is that custom? Is that a custom configuration, or where you showed up a content block with news and Yammer posts?
So I'll go back because I think it's easier to spoil the surprise. So the feed that I showed here, this is not custom, that's out of the box. The tiles that you have here on your dashboard need to be configured and set up by your IT team, or an organisation like Adin 365 that know how to do that. But that's for the best, really, because the tiles that you put here would absolutely need to be specific to your organisation, to the extent that they're aligned to use cases and needs that your employees have. And of course, organisations are very diverse. They have frontline, they have head office, some are global, some are local. So the feed element is out of the box, and these tiles need to be configured.
Perfect. And another question that had come in, I'm not sure if it's with regards to the same thing or not. Chris Redmond had asked, is that connection app capability something unique to what Adin 365 does, or is that just with Viva Connections?
So it's Viva Connections capability. So Microsoft have given this to you, not Adin 365. But the tiles that you see here have been built and configured by us. The content feed in my example was put together by us. In your world, that would be put together by you. And the intranet also needs to be hooked up in a specific way for it to work and to be surfaced within Viva Connections. So the best way I can describe it is the framework is there. You've got that. Microsoft have given that to you, but you or a partner needs to get that content together for you so that it manifests properly within the app. Slightly strange behavior, but in order for your intranet homepage, for example, to be the landing page within Viva Connections on the desktop, it needs to be on something that's called your home root site. It can't just be any old communications hub. So there's just some technical nuance there that you need to have your ducks in a row on in order for this to work properly.
Perfect. And one other question I want to just throw out at you, Suzy, is how do you strike a balance between integrating digital trends while also creating something that's familiar or standard with employees?
I think the if you put together the content that delivers against a task or a use case onto a page, and then work with a designer back from that to make it look good, and that they will bring in the right elements from what's trendy and available. And the reason for doing it that way is because a designer will not go too mad, right? Their job is to make things look good. And whereas if you go the other way around, which often organizations do, which is they get a designer on the case first and then work out their content after, you can end up with a stunning page, but the content isn't useful to the business, or that there's room for too much content or not enough content. So I would always start with the content and the journey and the task you're trying to get people to complete, and then sit with the designer to go back from that to make those pages beautiful.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Anybody can continue to ask your questions in the Q&A box, and when Suzy finishes her presentation, we'll be sure to answer them.
Great. I really wanted to close this section by taking what we've said so far about the way you can deliver a brand aligned experience and what that ends up looking like for organizations, to show you some examples. I have to ask Ben, who's my colleague on this call at the moment, to post into the message box a URL. And this URL is for an Add-in 365 brochure with which showcases 4 client projects that have all been delivered this autumn. So these are not projects from a year ago. All of these client case studies feature our clients' comms directors talking about their key tips, things they wish they'd known before they'd started, what they were trying to achieve, how they went about it. It's got some great visuals in there as well. So do click on that link and go and have a look at that brochure in your own time, and feel free to share it with colleagues, especially if you're looking at approaches for this journey that you're about to go on, or you're looking at refreshing, because some of those clients were moving on to delivering their employee experiences in 365 fresh for the first time. Others were updating from on-prem or from old versions of cloud applications that they had in use. So we'll start with St James Place, the wealth management company. We went through something called success definition with those guys to understand where is it that the organisation's going in the next 12 to 24 months, and then developing that task-based architecture against those organisation goals. And I think it really is a brilliant way to structure a project, because then it avoids that pitfall of your project being seen as an IT project or a comms project. It positions these sorts of programs as actually underpinning the way that the organisation is going to meet their strategy in the next 12 to 24 months. And it really helps to shake out people who can support with that content production as well. So St James Place, we went through that activity. They took a number of our pre-canned templates that we workshopped with them, firstly to get the content structure completely correct for them. And then also our designer went through a branding exercise. Now, some organisations want something really rich and textured. We're going to see some others in a moment that went for clean and clear and wanted lots of white space. SJP wanted something really rich that looked luxurious and would appeal to their employees. And you can see they've got very, very dark gold and blue hues, and those have been complemented with pictures that are part of their supplied photo album, for want of a better word. And those have been slightly scaled back to sit neatly behind the text that they wanted to present to the business. And you can see that on a number of the screens. So St James did go for something very rich, in complete contrast to Wincanton, who wanted to focus on photography, and the story they wanted their photography to tell was one of the positive ways that their supply chain benefited the community and society. So they wanted a big focus on the photography, and otherwise a very white and clean UI. But again, completely the same methodology that we had adopted with St James Place, where we went through that success definition. We understood where the organisation was trying to go, took our core template, content templates, iterated those with the client, branded them, and then made them available through Site Builder for content editors to populate. Signant Health, again, same toolkit, quite a different look and feel. They doubled in size over the last 21 months as they supported the various pharmaceutical companies testing their COVID vaccines. And so they needed to culture build through their internal digital platforms and give people a sense of what it means to work for Signet Health. And Wales and West Utilities followed the same method, but were organisationally very interesting because they have lots of different types of employees. We've got individuals that are in the streets digging up gas pipes, contact centres who are dealing with vulnerable individuals who've perhaps not got any central heating. And then, of course, they had their head office staff as well. So their choice of schema needed to be warm, inviting, and give that community feel that they were taking out in their external brand as well. And I mentioned as one of my points earlier that I mentioned in one of my points earlier that having that sense of external brand coming through internally is very important if we want individuals to live those values. Okay, have we got any other questions?
Yes. So another question that came in is, what challenges do you face balancing accessibility or 508 compliance with the more sleek graphics?
Ultimately, we point out to the organisations we work with what is and is not accessible, and then they take a call on it. I can't think of a single one of our clients that doesn't have a diversity and inclusion team, but fundamentally we are not the final decision makers on that. We do present concepts that are accessible, and then we go from there.
Fantastic. Right now, those seems to be all the questions that we've had. We've done a really great job of hitting them up along the way. I guess, oh, one other question just came in. Do you only work with and support the employee experiences of very large companies, or what type of organizations do you work with?
We work with organisations that have a few hundred people as well at the other end. But we don't go much smaller than that. I think the only real difference between a very small and very large company, if you think of 200 compared to 2,000 or 200,000, is the ability to actually know people, know the person that does. But in terms of the approach, having something task-based, having the ability to automate the generation of sites where you're going to need a lot of them, all of those principles absolutely stand, even if you're not at the 200,000 end.
Right.
I mean, we're much smaller than that, and we do all of that ourselves internally as well.
Right. And especially, I think recently I heard some kind of a crazy stat, and I can't remember exactly what it is. So nobody quote me on this, but it's something like on average, it's like one internal comms executive per like 500 people is sort of the average, at least across the US. So, you know, if not even more. So I'm sure this could be helpful for a lot of different size companies.
Yeah, I think that's probably about the same in the UK as well.
Right. Oh, got another question come in is, has integration of Teams, Yammer, and other add-ins been beneficial to companies that you've worked with in terms of communicating to employees?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to contextualize how these things are fitting together and your reasoning for doing that. So having a Yammer community within the context of a community template that tells you who the champions are, what the strategy of that community is, what the goals are, and whether or not they've been achieved. You need to think about it that way. So if we're going to have a community, what else are people going to need to know about this community? And then that informs the technology decision, which might be the Yammer web part within the SharePoint page. And equally, if you think about something like Microsoft Teams, why would you communicate through Microsoft Teams? Or I would say you as a communicator, you're communicating through Microsoft Teams where you have an operational update. So there are specific groups of people that need that information, not everybody. And so if they're working within Microsoft Teams already, creating an announcement or post, sending that to multiple teams can be a really good way of getting that to them. So start with the problem. Think, how, if I just send this to an employee, how exactly is that going to be received? And then work out what the technology put together is behind that. But yeah, we've absolutely found it useful because it's given us the opportunity to be tailored and specific, rather than that blanket approach that 10 years ago was the only one you really had, in the sense that you would have news and it would be on an intranet homepage and people would go there to read their news. It wasn't very sophisticated, whereas now there's a lot of sophistication available.
And on top of it, there's people everywhere right now too.
Yeah.
So that brings to another question: is what advice do you have for communications teams when trying to work more closely with their IT teams and technology teams? And do you feel it's
Yeah.
necessary?
Yeah, I think big tip on that is talk to them early, and partner with them. I think we tend to see two behaviours. Obviously there's a third, which is perfect harmony, which happens as well. But if it doesn't go well, it tends to be that either comms have rushed ahead and they've engaged they've started shortlisting, talking to organisations, and they haven't looped IT into that to understand what's important from the technology side. Because that there are comms goals and desires, and then there's IT goals and desires, and they're not just an inconvenient hurdle to overcome. Because actually there are some really sound technology inputs that if I was a comms person, I would absolutely want. For example, if you keep stuff in SharePoint Modern, as we do at Add-in 365, and you add into that, you get to benefit from all the good stuff that Microsoft give you all the time. That's a good model. There are lots and lots of products in the market that take you what we call off box, all the way over there on a proprietary system. And that means when you see a Microsoft update, a really cool comms feature, and you're like, yes, we want to use that. You're like, no, you can't, because you're on this other proprietary platform over there. So I think it's important early on to find out from IT what's important to you, explain, what's important to them, explain what's important to you, and really partner with them. Because if as comms people we just go down that road on our own, there are going to be technology challenges later on that we could come to regret. I think the other thing that we see, which also isn't great, is where comms feel a bit nervous to have an IT conversation. They step back a little bit. Before you know it, IT have given them the solution that they must work with. And it doesn't offer some of the capabilities that are really important to comms. And, we've talked for a whole hour today about branding. That is never going to be on an IT person's list, not even at number 25 of things to watch out for, or requirements that are needed. So if you want to do this, you see things you want, don't worry about going to them and saying, look, I am not at all technical, but it is important to me that as we look for a new employee experience platform, that I am able to do this, that I need. And yeah, I think the overall advice is partner early. Don't be afraid to just say, I'm not technical, and even be a bit bold. And if they just start talking technical at you, just say, look, you're going to need to put me in touch with a colleague that I can speak to from a business perspective, and almost give that problem to IT rather than shying away from inputting, because ultimately it's communications and the business that are using that tool day in and day out. For IT, it's just a system. They're not going to be the core users of what's made available.
Right. And with that, kind of when you're talking about, working closely with your IT teams, what about other teams or your stakeholders internally? Do you suggest working with marketing so that way it's almost like a cohesive brand, internal and externally as well?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to pull together are the business objectives, not functional objectives. And there is a big difference there, because a business objective might be, we really want to be able to talk to our employees. What you don't want to be saying is, we specifically need a web part where we can do this and it has this function and feature, and then our employees can do this and this and this, because it immediately narrows down what's possible and available to you. If you can work with the head of marketing, head of HR to say, what business objectives do you want to meet? And, head of HR might say, I'd like to retain people. I'd like to have a really smooth onboarding experience. Head of marketing might say, I just want it all to be brand aligned. Head of operations might say, I want it to be easy to follow processes. That's brilliant stuff to capture. And if you throw a list of those business objectives at IT or at vendors that you talk to, you're going to get some fantastic innovative responses that you can then pick and choose from. But if you narrow that down before you've done anything else to functional things that you need, functions and features, then that's what you're going to see from people. And actually, if you throw the problem out there or the business goal out there, you're going to get a really wide range of options, and it's going to give you a brilliant feel for what's possible.
That's perfect. And what about as far as like receiving feedback back from employees? Is that something that is able to be done as well?
The sorts of feedback that we recommend you take, especially ahead of going live, are group-wide, and you can do it within Office 365 now, and we certainly run ours there, where you can run a Teams call and you can actually do a live survey as you're doing a show around of the site that you've developed. And you might say something like, we're on the homepage. Where would you expect to find information about? And in that moment, you can have 100 people on that call that all vote where they think they'd find it. Okay, now where do you think you'd go to find this? And you get that. So if we know that findability is a problem in this world and with these sorts of projects, then let's ask specific questions about where people think they're going to find things. And that's really useful feedback to take from people that deals with something we know can be a problem later on and allows us to course correct and adjust. And nothing is ever perfect at that stage. So I think the thing with feedback is to avoid, do you like it? And much more focus your questions against things that will produce answers to help you improve the site. So where would you expect to? How would you? Rather than, what would you like, or what do you think? Because people then think on behalf of others and it's all made up. So they might say, oh, well, I think some people might want to do this. And it's like, right, but do you want to do it? No, I don't want to do it. But some people might want to do it. It's like, well, let's hear that from them. And then if we hear that, we'll action it. So I think it's important to ask specific questions when it comes to feedback and make sure you know that when you get an answer, that's something you can action.
Completely makes sense. And plus, if everybody's telling you the same place where they think that something should be, then, maybe that's where you should put it.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, I think we've hit all of our questions and we're just about at time. Suzy, is there any last minute, like a feedback that you want to provide anybody before I close everything off?
No, just do have a look at that brochure and get in touch if you want to discuss anything further.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks so much, Suzy. Again, I want to let you know, I apologize for the incorrect photo in the beginning. I've just corrected that for the post-event materials. We were not trying to see if everyone was paying attention this morning. So on behalf of Reagan Communications, we're sorry for that mix-up.
That's okay.
But I definitely want to say thank you to you, Suzy, and the entire Add-in 365 team for making this webinar possible. And of course, to everybody in the audience, thanks for joining us and sharing your great questions. As always, we're so glad you joined us for this important and timely topic discussion.
Yep.
Our goal at Reagan is to be your resource for insights and a megaphone for change within the communications industry. Today, particularly in reconnecting your dispersed employees through a brand-aligned digital hub. Over the next 24 to 48 hours, you'll receive a survey. After you complete this survey, it will direct you to a post-event link with the slide deck, a recording of today's event, as well as a link to that brochure and any other fantastic bonus material. So with that, I want to say thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And this concludes our webinar. Have a great day.